The first time Blake mentioned my move like it was a bad thing, I laughed. Not because it was funny. Mostly because I thought he was joking. We were sitting on the hood of his truck outside the gas station near the lake, eating terrible microwave burritos at midnight like we had since high school. Same cracked parking lot. Same stupid mosquitoes. Same old rock station playing from his truck speakers because Blake refused to use Spotify like a normal person. "You're really doing it?" he asked. I glanced over. "Doing what?" "Leaving." The way he said it made my chest tighten a little. I shrugged. "It's only Chicago. I'm not moving to another planet." Blake stared out toward the empty road instead of looking at me. His jaw flexed once. "Still far." I nudged his shoulder lightly. "You'll survive without me." That finally got a small laugh out of him, but it faded fast. "Yeah," he muttered. "Guess I'll have to." At the time, I didn't think much of it. Blake had always been weird about change. Weird about anything ending, honestly. He still complained when our favorite diner changed ketchup brands 3 years ago. But after that night, something shifted. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Just slowly enough that I kept questioning whether I was imagining it. Blake started showing up everywhere. At my apartment while I packed boxes. At work when my shift ended. Outside my gym pretending he was in the area, even though the gym was 20 minutes from his place. And every conversation somehow circled back to Chicago. "You already found an apartment? Who's your roommate gonna be? You know nobody there. You really think you'll stay long?" At first, I answered patiently. Then jokingly. Then carefully. Because underneath the questions, there was something else. Something heavier. The truth was, Blake and I had been inseparable since we were 17. Same school. Same jobs during college. Same routines after graduation. People joked that we acted like an old married couple, and Blake always rolled his eyes while I laughed too hard at it. But lately, the jokes had started feeling less funny. Especially because of the way Blake looked at me afterward. Like he was checking whether I noticed something. One evening, about 3 weeks before my move, he came over to help me pack my kitchen. Which mostly meant he sat on the counter drinking beer while I did the actual work. I told him. "You invited me for emotional support." "I absolutely did not." "Too late," he said. "I'm supporting emotionally." I shook my head, smiling despite myself. The apartment was chaos. Half-packed boxes everywhere. My entire life split into piles labeled keep, donate, and why do I own this? Blake watched me tape up another box in silence. Then quietly, "You excited?" I paused. "Yeah," I admitted. "I think so." That answer visibly hurt him. He tried to hide it fast, but I saw it. And suddenly the room felt too small. Blake grabbed his beer again, eyes dropping to the floor. "Right." I frowned. "What's your deal lately?" "What do you mean?" "You've been acting weird about this move for weeks." "I'm not acting weird." "You absolutely are." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. That almost never happened with Blake. Usually he always had something to say. Some joke. Some comeback. Some easy way out of serious conversations. But not this time. Finally he muttered, "I just think it's stupid." I blinked. "My job?" "No. The whole thing." I stared at him. "Okay. Wow." He rubbed his face immediately. "That came out wrong." "No, I think it came out exactly right." "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" Silence. Heavy silence. The kind that suddenly makes you aware of every tiny sound in the room. The hum of the fridge. Traffic outside. The way Blake kept flexing his fingers against the beer bottle like he needed something to do with his hands. Finally he said quietly, "You've never wanted to leave before." I leaned against the counter. "People change." "Yeah," he muttered. "Guess they do." Something about the way he said it made my stomach twist. Because it didn't sound angry. It sounded hurt. And Blake almost never let himself sound hurt. That night after he left, I stood alone in my half-packed apartment wondering why the conversation felt so wrong. Because logically, none of this made sense. Best friends move. People grow up. People leave towns all the time. So why did it suddenly feel like I was breaking up with someone? After that conversation, Blake stopped pretending everything was normal. That was the weirdest part. Not that he got angry. Not that he picked fights. It was the opposite. He got quieter. For almost a week, every interaction between us felt slightly off-center, like we were both carefully avoiding something neither of us knew how to name. He still came around constantly. Still texted me every morning. Still sent me dumb videos at 2 a.m. But now there was tension underneath everything. Like every moment had started meaning more than it used to. One night, I found him sitting outside my apartment building in his truck after work. He hadn't texted. Hadn't called. Just waited. I climbed into the passenger seat, tossing my backpack onto the floorboard. You stalking me now? Maybe. Normally he'd grin after saying something like that. This time he just stared ahead through the windshield. You okay? I asked. Fine. You sure? Jordan, he sighed. You ask that every 5 minutes. Because you keep acting like somebody kicked your dog. That finally got a laugh out of him. Small. Tired. We sat there in silence for a minute while headlights slid across the parking lot around us. Then Blake suddenly asked, You ever think maybe you're making a mistake? I leaned back slowly. About the move? Yeah. I studied him carefully. Why do you care so much? His grip tightened on the steering wheel. I don't know, he said too fast. That answer hit me strangely hard. Because Blake always knew. Even when he lied, he usually lied well. But lately every answer sounded unfinished. You hate your job here, he continued quickly. Your apartment. You complain about this town constantly. So why suddenly run off now? I frowned. That's literally why people move. Or maybe people stay and fix things. Blake. What? You're doing it again. Doing what? Talking like this move is happening to you. The second the words left my mouth, the truck went completely silent. Blake's jaw tightened immediately. That's not what I'm doing. It kind of is. No, he said firmly. I'm trying to understand why you're so desperate to leave. I'm not desperate. You accepted the job in like 2 days. Because it's a good opportunity. You could have found one here. I stared at him. What is your actual problem? And there it was again. That hesitation. That moment where something clearly climbed halfway up Blake's throat before he shoved it back down. Finally he looked away and muttered. Forget it. No. Jordan. No, seriously. Talk to me. Blake laughed quietly under his breath, but there was no humor in it. That's the problem, he said softly. I blinked. What does that mean? He shook his head immediately. Nothing. But it didn't feel like nothing. Not even close. A few days later, my friends threw me a goodbye party at a bar downtown. Nothing huge. Just the usual group. Beer. Music too loud to properly talk over. Blake showed up late. The second he walked in, I felt it. Noticed him immediately without even trying. Which honestly should have told me something right there. He looked exhausted. Baseball cap low over his eyes, hoodie sleeves shoved halfway up his forearms. Like he barely slept. Look who finally made it, I called. Traffic. There is no traffic in this town. Then aliens, he replied automatically. That was more like him. For the next hour things almost felt normal again. Almost. Until one of my coworkers asked the question. So when do you leave exactly? 2 weeks, I answered. Blake went completely still beside me. And you're staying in Chicago permanently? She asked. Hopefully. The word barely left my mouth before Blake stood up. I need another drink. He disappeared toward the bar before anyone could respond. I watched him go, uneasy settling into my stomach again. You too good? My coworker asked casually. Yeah, I answered immediately. But even I didn't sound convinced. About 20 minutes later, I found Blake outside behind the building alone. The alley smelled like cigarettes and rain. He was leaning against a brick wall, staring down at his phone without actually using it. You disappeared. Needed air. You hate outside. Good point. I stepped beside him. You want to tell me what's going on with you? I already told you. No, you really haven't. He stayed quiet. I could hear music thumping faintly through the walls behind us. Cars passing somewhere nearby. Blake finally said. What? You act like leaving is easy. I frowned. It's not easy. Really? He looked at me then. Because you don't seem sad about it at all. That caught me off guard. Of course I'm sad. Could have fooled me. What is that supposed to mean? He laughed quietly again, shaking his head. I don't know anymore. Something in my chest pulled tight. Because Blake looked genuinely miserable. And suddenly I realized this wasn't just about me moving away from our town. It was about me moving away from him. The thought hit hard enough that I went completely silent. Blake noticed immediately. What? I swallowed. Nothing. But my brain had already started connecting dots I wasn't ready to look at directly. All the constant texts. Showing up everywhere. The weird jealousy every time I mentioned Chicago. The way he looked at me lately like he was trying to memorize something. And worst of all, the fact that part of me already knew. Blake exhaled slowly beside me. Forget I said anything. I don't think I can. For a second neither of us moved. The alley suddenly felt way too small. Then Blake quietly said, You ever think maybe some things are harder to say when there's a deadline on them? I looked at him sharply. What things? His eyes met mine. And for one terrifying second, I thought he was actually going to tell me. But instead he just shook his head. Doesn't matter. Then he walked back inside before I could stop him. And I stood there alone in the alley realizing my heart was racing for reasons I didn't fully understand yet. After the goodbye party, I started avoiding being alone with Blake. Not intentionally at first. At least that's what I told myself. But suddenly every conversation with him felt dangerous in a way I couldn't explain. Like we were circling something too big to touch directly. And the worst part? I couldn't stop thinking about him. Not in the normal best friend way I'd always thought about him. Different now. I noticed stupid things suddenly. The way his voice dropped when he got tired. How he always reached for my fries without asking. The fact that every girl he'd ever dated looked nothing alike except for one thing, none of them lasted long. And once my brain started pulling at those threads, it wouldn't stop. 3 nights later, Blake showed up at my apartment again. This time carrying pizza like a peace offering. I come in carbs, he announced. I opened the door slowly. You know you can just text before appearing outside my home like a Victorian ghost. Too late, he said, walking inside. I already haunt this place. Normally that would have made me laugh immediately. Instead my chest did something weird. Because lately everything Blake said sounded like it meant 2 things. We ate on the floor surrounded by moving boxes while some random sitcom played quietly in the background. For a while, things felt almost normal again. Until Blake casually asked, So what happens when you move? I glanced over. What do you mean? With us. The question landed harder than it should have. We stay friends? Long-distance friendships. You sound like somebody going through a divorce. Blake smiled faintly, but it disappeared fast. I'm serious. So am I replied carefully. We'll visit each other. Call. Text. It's not the end of the world. Yeah, he muttered. Maybe. I studied him for a second. You really think I'm just gonna disappear? No, he admitted quietly. That's actually the problem. Something shifted in the room again. That same tension. That same almost confession feeling. Blake stared down at the pizza box instead of at me. You know what I realized? He said softly. What? You're like built into my life. I stopped breathing for a second. He kept going before I could answer. Every routine I have somehow includes you. Every good thing. Every normal thing. He laughed quietly. It's actually pathetic. That's not pathetic. It kind of is. No, I said carefully. It's just called having a best friend. Blake finally looked at me then, and the expression on his face made my stomach twist. Because he looked sad. Not embarrassed. Not awkward. Sad. Yeah, he said quietly. Maybe. That maybe echoed in my chest long after he said it. The next week got worse. Or better. Honestly, I still don't know. Because once I started noticing things, I couldn't unnotice them. Like how Blake touched me constantly. Not dramatic touches. Nothing obvious. Just small things. A hand on my shoulder. His knee against mine. Fingers brushing my wrist when he handed me something. Tiny things I'd ignored for years because that was just Blake. Except now I was realizing he didn't do that with anyone else. One afternoon we were packing the last boxes in my apartment when my phone rang. Blake was taping up a box beside me while I answered. Hey, Mom. We talked for a minute about the move until she casually asked. And Blake's helping? Yeah. I smiled automatically, glancing toward him. Blake looked up at my smile immediately. Like he'd felt it. My chest tightened again. Mom laughed through the phone. That boy's gonna miss you more than anybody. Blake froze. Completely froze. I laughed nervously. Yeah, probably. No, seriously. She continued. He looked heartbroken at dinner last week. My stomach dropped. What? Blake was staring at me now. Jordan, my mom said carefully. You really haven't noticed? Every muscle in my body locked up. Noticed what? Silence. Then, oh, she said quietly. Maybe I shouldn't have said anything. The room suddenly felt too hot. Mom. Blake stood up immediately. I should go. I turned toward him too fast. Wait. It's fine, he said quickly, already grabbing his hoodie. Blake. But he was already moving toward the door. Panic exploded in my chest before I fully understood why. I ended the call immediately and followed him into the hallway. Blake, stop. He wouldn't look at me. Seriously, I gotta go. What did she mean? That made him finally pause. Only for a second. Then he laughed quietly to himself, rubbing a hand over his face like he was exhausted. Jesus Christ. Blake. You really don't know? The question hit like a punch. Because suddenly I did know. Or at least some part of me did. Every late-night conversation. Every jealous reaction. Every weird silence lately. Every look I pretended not to understand. Blake stared at me like he was waiting for the world to end. And honestly, it kind of felt like it was. Say something, he muttered finally. But my brain had completely stopped working. Because there was only one terrifying thought repeating itself now. My best friend was in love with me. And the scariest part? I didn't know if that was the problem anymore. Blake looked like he regretted everything immediately. Not because he'd said too much. Because he'd finally stopped hiding it. The hallway between our apartments suddenly felt painfully narrow. Too close. Too quiet. You should go, I said finally, my voice sounding strange even to me. That hurt him. I saw it instantly. His expression shut down a little, like he was bracing for impact. Yeah, he muttered. Probably. But neither of us moved. I could still hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. My best friend was in love with me. The sentence kept repeating in my head like my brain didn't know what else to do with it. And underneath the panic was something even worse. Relief. Like some deeply buried part of me had been waiting for confirmation. Blake rubbed both hands over his face. Look, forget it. I don't think I can. You should try. That's not really how this works. He laughed once under his breath. Exhausted. Believe me, I know. I swallowed hard. How long? That question made him go completely still. Then quietly, do you really want to know? Yes. Blake stared at the floor for a second before answering. A while. How long is a while? His jaw flexed. Since college, he admitted softly. I felt dizzy. Blake, I didn't plan it, he said quickly. I didn't even want it, honestly. The honesty in his voice hurt. Because Blake sounded genuinely miserable about it. I kept thinking it would go away, he continued quietly. Then you started talking about moving, and suddenly I felt like somebody was ripping organs out of my body. I stared at him speechless. Every conversation from the last month replayed differently now. You're built into my life. You act like leaving is easy. Long-distance friendships. None of it had been casual. Not even a little. Blake finally looked at me fully, and his expression almost wrecked me. Because he already looked heartbroken. Like he expected this to end badly. I know this screws everything up, he said carefully. And I swear to God I never meant to make things weird between us. I opened my mouth. Closed it again. Because the truth was, things had already been weird for a while. I just hadn't understood why. You don't have to say anything, Blake added quickly. Seriously. Just after your mom said that. He shook his head. Didn't really seem like there was a point lying anymore. Silence stretched between us. Then he quietly asked, Are you mad? The question hit me hard. Because Blake sounded genuinely scared. No, I answered immediately. His shoulders loosened slightly. I'm just, I exhaled hard. Trying to process this. Yeah. Fair. Another long silence. Then Blake said the thing that shattered me a little. I'll back off. I frowned. What? You're moving anyway, he said carefully. Probably for the best, honestly. Something sharp twisted in my chest. For the best? Jordan. No, seriously, what does that mean? It means I don't want to ruin your life because I'm stupid. You're not stupid. Trust me, he muttered. I absolutely am. I stared at him. At the exhaustion under his eyes. The tension in his shoulders. The way he kept refusing to fully look at me now. And suddenly I realized something horrible. Blake had probably been dealing with this alone for years. Watching me date people. Listening to me talk about moving away. Pretending to be fine every single day. The thought hurt way more than it should have. Why didn't you tell me? I asked quietly. He smiled sadly. And accomplish what exactly? I don't know. Neither did I. That answer lodged itself directly in my chest. Because there was no manipulation in it. No pressure. Blake genuinely never expected anything from me. He just loved me anyway. The realization made my throat tight. I should go, he said again softly. This time he actually turned toward the stairs. And panic hit me so fast it shocked me. Wait. Blake stopped immediately. I walked toward him before my brain fully caught up. Don't disappear. His expression cracked slightly. I'm trying not to make this worse. You disappearing would make it worse. Jordan. I mean it. He looked at me for a long second. You don't know me anything. I know. You don't have to fix this. I know that too. Blake swallowed hard. Then quietly. You know what the worst part is? What? I was actually getting ready to let you go. The words knocked the air out of me. What? I told myself after you moved, I'd finally get over it. He laughed weakly. Thought distance might force me to act like a normal person again. That's not fair. What isn't? You talking about yourself like that? Blake looked genuinely confused by that response. Jordan, I'm in love with my best friend. That's objectively messy. My heart kicked hard against my ribs. Because hearing him say it out loud changed everything. In love with my best friend. Not a crush. Not confusion. Love. And the terrifying thing was, I couldn't stop staring at his mouth after he said it. Blake noticed. I knew he noticed because his breathing changed instantly. The hallway went dead silent. Neither of us moved. Neither of us looked away. Then Blake whispered my name like it physically hurt him. Jordan. And suddenly I realized something that scared me even more than his confession. I didn't want him to leave either. Blake looked at me like he was standing too close to a fire. Like one wrong move would ruin everything. And honestly, I felt exactly the same. Neither of us spoke for what felt like forever. The hallway light buzzed faintly overhead while Blake stood one step below me on the stairs, breathing carefully like he was trying not to make anything worse. "You should probably hate me a little," he said finally. That snapped me out of whatever trance I was in. "Why would I hate you?" He gave me a tired look. "Jordan. No, seriously. Because I lied to you for years." "You didn't lie." "I absolutely did." "You were scared." Blake laughed softly under his breath. "That doesn't magically make it noble." I stepped closer before I could overthink it. "You know what's weird?" I admitted quietly. "What?" "I think some part of me already knew." His eyes lifted to mine immediately. My chest tightened. "Since when?" he asked carefully. I swallowed. "I don't know. Maybe longer than I realized." Blake stared at me in complete silence. Then, "That's somehow worse." I almost laughed from nerves. "How is that worse?" "Because now I'm wondering if literally everyone knew except us." The thing was, I suddenly wasn't sure that was wrong. My mom. Our friends. The constant jokes about us acting married. Maybe everyone had seen this coming before we did. Blake rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. "I should really leave." "You keep saying that." "Because I keep almost doing something stupid." The air shifted immediately after he said it. I felt it physically. "So do it," I said before my brain could stop me. Blake froze. Completely froze. His eyes searched my face carefully like he genuinely thought he'd heard me wrong. "Jordan." My pulse was going insane now. "You said you keep almost doing something stupid," I whispered. "So do it." The silence afterward felt enormous. Then Blake took one slow step toward me. "Tell me to stop," he said quietly. I couldn't. That was the terrifying part. I should have been panicking. Should have been pulling away. Should have been trying to save the friendship, or at least preserve whatever normal version of our lives still existed. Instead, all I could think was, finally. The realization hit me so hard it almost made me dizzy. Finally explained every weird feeling lately. Every moment that suddenly made sense. Every time Blake looked at me too long and I looked back anyway. Blake reached up slowly, carefully touching the side of my face like he still expected me to disappear. "You have no idea how many times I've wanted to do that," he admitted softly. My heart practically stopped. Then he kissed me. And the craziest part? It didn't feel shocking. It felt familiar. Like something my body understood immediately even while my brain completely short-circuited. Blake kissed me gently at first, almost hesitant, like he was terrified I'd change my mind halfway through. But the second I kissed him back, something in him broke open. His hand slid into my hair. He exhaled sharply against my mouth like he'd been holding his breath for years. And suddenly all the tension between us finally had somewhere to go. When we pulled apart, both of us looked completely wrecked. Blake stared at me in disbelief. "That definitely just happened," I whispered. "Yeah," he breathed. Neither of us moved away. Blake actually laughed softly then, the sound shaky and overwhelmed. "I genuinely don't know whether to kiss you again or have a panic attack." That finally made me laugh too. Which somehow broke the tension enough for both of us to breathe again. Then reality hit. Hard. "I move in 12 days, I said quietly. Blake's expression fell immediately. "Right. That. The thing hanging over everything." He stepped back slowly, running both hands through his hair now. "Jesus Christ." My stomach twisted. "What?" "I spent 3 years trying not to ruin our friendship," he muttered. And apparently I waited until the absolute worst possible moment. You didn't ruin anything. You sure about that? I looked at him honestly. No. I wasn't sure about anything anymore. Because now everything had changed. And somehow the move that felt exciting a month ago suddenly felt unbearable. Blake saw the shift in my expression immediately. Don't, he said quickly. Don't what? Don't look at me like that. Like what? Like you're reconsidering your whole life. I opened my mouth. Closed it again. Because unfortunately, that was exactly what I was doing. Blake laughed weakly, rubbing his face again. This is such a disaster. But he didn't sound regretful. Not even close. And honestly, neither did I. For the next 2 days, Blake barely left my side. Not in an intense way. Not clingy. Just constant. Like now that everything was finally out in the open, neither of us knew how to go backward. And honestly, I didn't want to. The strange thing was how natural it felt. That should have scared me more than it did. But instead, every moment with him suddenly made more sense than before. The way he always looked for me first in crowded rooms. The late-night drives for no reason. The fact that every important memory from the last 5 years somehow included Blake. It was like my brain had finally found the missing piece to something it didn't realize was unfinished. On Friday night, Blake came over again. Except this time, when I opened the door, he kissed me immediately. Quick. Warm. Automatic. Like he'd wanted to do that forever. I actually laughed against his mouth. You're getting bold. You're moving in 12 days, he replied. I'm speedrunning emotional damage. That made my chest ache unexpectedly hard. Because underneath all the joking, I could feel it now too. The countdown. Every moment suddenly felt temporary. We ended up on my couch surrounded by half-packed boxes while some movie played unnoticed in the background. At one point Blake quietly asked, Are you freaking out? A little. Same. I looked over at him carefully. Do you regret telling me? He answered immediately. No. Not even hesitation. Just certainty. And somehow that made this all feel even more dangerous. Blake leaned back against the couch cushions, staring at the ceiling now. You know what's messed up? He said quietly. What? I was prepared for rejection. He laughed weakly. I actually had a whole plan. A plan? Yeah. You move away, I pretend to recover emotionally, eventually marry some poor woman I mildly tolerate. I burst out laughing. I'm serious. That's an insane plan. I know. His smile faded slowly after that. But you kissing me back? He admitted softly. That part wasn't in the plan. The way he said it completely wrecked me. Because Blake still sounded surprised. Still careful. Like he couldn't fully believe this was real yet. I shifted closer without thinking. Immediately his eyes dropped to my mouth again. That was becoming a problem. Or maybe the opposite of one. You know what I can't stop thinking about? I admitted quietly. What? How many times you almost told me? Blake groaned instantly, dragging a hand down his face. Please don't make me relive that. No, seriously. Jordan. I'm connecting so many dots right now. He laughed helplessly. Yeah, welcome to my personal hell. I nudged his shoulder lightly. You were really that obvious? To you? Apparently not. That's fair. To literally everyone else? Blake sighed. Probably catastrophic. I smiled despite myself. Then more quietly. Why me? That made him still immediately. What? Why did you fall in love with me? Blake stared at me like the question itself hurt. Finally he said softly, That's like asking why breathing happened. My chest tightened hard. He looked embarrassed immediately after saying it. Wow. That sounded way more dramatic out loud. No, I said quietly. It didn't. The room fell silent again. Then Blake admitted the thing that shattered me completely. I think I've been in love with you so long that I forgot there was a version of my life where I wasn't. I physically stopped breathing for a second. Because nobody had ever looked at me like Blake did when he said things like that. Not like a crush. Not temporary. Permanent. The realization was terrifying. And worse. I think part of me wanted it to be permanent too. Blake noticed the expression on my face immediately. What? I shook my head too fast. Nothing. Jordan. It's just. I exhaled slowly. This feels really big. Yeah, he whispered. It does. Neither of us mentioned the move for a while after that. Like maybe ignoring it would stop time somehow. Eventually, Blake's hand found mine between us on the couch. Comfortable. Easy. Like we'd done it 1,000 times already in another life. Then quietly he asked, "Do you still want to go?" The question hit hard because he asked it so carefully. Not manipulative. Not demanding. Just honest. And for the first time since accepting the Chicago job. I didn't know the answer. Blake saw that immediately. His expression changed fast. "Hey," he said softly. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Don't make a decision because of me." I looked at him helplessly. "You are the reason I can't think straight right now. That's exactly why you shouldn't decide anything yet." I laughed weakly. "Look at you suddenly being emotionally mature. Disgusting, honestly." That got another laugh out of me. But the heaviness stayed. Because no matter how good this felt, there was still a clock running. And both of us could hear it now. The closer my move got, the harder everything became. Not because Blake and I were fighting. Because we weren't. Honestly, that almost made it worse. Things between us felt good. Too good. Like we'd accidentally stepped into a version of our lives that fit so naturally it scared both of us. We started falling into routines immediately. Morning coffee together. Late night drives. Blake showing up at my apartment with food without asking what I wanted because he already knew. Every small thing between us carried this quiet intensity now. And underneath all of it was the same terrifying thought. What happens when I leave? 3 days before my move, Blake came with me to Chicago to help see the apartment. The drive should have been exciting. Instead, it felt weirdly emotional from the second we left town. Blake kept one hand on the wheel, while the other rested near mine on the center console the entire trip like he physically needed the contact. At one point he muttered, "I already hate this." I smiled weakly. "We've been on the road for 2 hours." "Exactly." The apartment itself was nice. Small. Modern. Close to downtown. 3 weeks ago I would have loved it instantly. Now all I could think was, Blake isn't here. The realization hit so hard it genuinely startled me. Blake walked through the kitchen quietly while I stood near the window pretending to admire the view. Finally he asked carefully, "What do you think?" I looked around again. And suddenly the apartment didn't feel exciting anymore. It felt lonely. Blake noticed my expression immediately. "Jordan." I exhaled slowly. "I don't know." He walked toward me carefully like he was approaching something fragile. "You don't have to decide today." "Yes, I do." "No," he said firmly. "You really don't?" I looked at him helplessly. "This was supposed to be simple." "Yeah," he said softly. "I know." The thing was, I was angry at the timing. Not at Blake. Not at myself. Just the timing. Because if this had happened 6 months ago? A year ago? Maybe everything would have been different. Instead, we had barely 2 weeks to figure out feelings either of us fully understood yet before potentially becoming long distance immediately. That night we stayed in a hotel outside the city because either of us wanted to drive back exhausted. 1 room. 2 beds. Which would have been funny if the tension between us wasn't so unbearable. Blake sat on the edge of his bed scrolling aimlessly through his phone, while I stood near the window staring out at traffic below. Finally he said quietly, "You're spiraling." "I'm thinking." "Dangerous hobby." I laughed despite myself. Then, "I hate this." "I know. I hate that I finally figured this out right when everything's changing." Blake went quiet. Then softly, "You know what I hate?" "What?" "That part of me is still happy." I turned toward him. He shrugged helplessly. "I should probably be devastated right now. But instead I keep thinking about the fact that you kissed me back." The honesty in his voice completely cracked something open inside me. Because Blake wasn't trying to guilt me into staying. He was just loving me honestly. Even if it hurt him. I crossed the room before I could overthink it. Blake looked up immediately, eyes tracking me carefully. Then I sat beside him, close enough that our knees touched. "You know what scares me?" I admitted quietly. "What?" "That this already feels real." Blake stared at me for a long second. Then softly, "It's always felt real to me." That almost destroyed me. I leaned forward before I could stop myself and kissed him again. This time Blake kissed me back immediately. Certain now. Like he was finally letting himself have something he'd wanted too long. His hands slid against my jaw carefully, almost reverently, and suddenly every emotion I'd been trying to organize completely collapsed. Because this wasn't temporary to him. And maybe it wasn't temporary to me either. When we pulled apart, Blake rested his forehead against mine and laughed shakily. "You know what's insane?" "What?" "If you still leave, I'm probably gonna spend the next 6 months driving to Chicago every weekend like a psychopath." I laughed quietly. "Every weekend?" "Jordan," he said softly, "I'd barely survive the idea of losing you while living in the same town." My chest physically hurt now. Because I believed him. Every word. The room fell quiet again after that. Then Blake whispered the question both of us had been avoiding. "Do you want to stay?" I closed my eyes immediately. Because finally I knew the answer. And it terrified me. I didn't answer Blake right away. Not because I didn't know. Because I did. That was the problem. The hotel room felt impossibly quiet around us while his question hung between us like something fragile. "Do you want to stay?" Blake's forehead still rested lightly against mine. His breathing uneven now, like he regretted asking and needed the answer at the same time. Finally I whispered, "Yeah." He went completely still. I pulled back just enough to look at him properly. "Yeah," I repeated softly. "I think I do." The expression on Blake's face right then was something I'll probably remember for the rest of my life. Not victory. Not relief exactly. Disbelief. Like he'd already convinced himself losing me was inevitable. "Jordan, I accepted the job before I knew this," I admitted quietly. "Before I knew what this was." Blake swallowed hard. "You can't stay just because of me." "But what if I want to?" "That's different." "Is it?" "Yes," he said immediately. "Because I never wanted you trapped here from me." The thing was that answer only made me love him more. Because Blake wasn't trying to keep me. He was trying to protect me from making a choice too fast. Even now. I laughed weakly, rubbing both hands over my face. "This is insane." "A little. I spent months convincing myself leaving was what I wanted." I looked at him helplessly. "And now suddenly all I can think about is you." Blake's eyes softened immediately. "You know what the worst part is?" I continued quietly. "I don't even think this came out of nowhere." He smiled faintly. "Yeah. Same." I sat beside him in silence for a long moment before finally admitting the truth. "I think I've been in love with you longer than I realized." Blake closed his eyes immediately like the sentence physically hit him. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "What? You cannot say things like that casually." I laughed quietly despite the emotion building in my chest. But Blake looked overwhelmed now. Completely overwhelmed. "You really mean that?" he asked softly. "Yes." The answer came easy now. Too easy. Because once I stopped fighting it, everything became obvious. There was never anybody else I called first. Never anybody else who felt like home. Never anybody whose opinion mattered this much to me. It had always been Blake. I just hadn't understood what I was looking at until I almost lost him. Blake shook his head slowly, still staring at me like he couldn't fully process this was real. You know what's funny? He said quietly. What? I spent years trying to want less from you. He smiled sadly. And now suddenly I have everything. That finally broke me a little. I kissed him again immediately just to stop myself from getting emotional. Blake laughed softly against my mouth before pulling me closer. And for the first time since all of this started, neither of us felt scared anymore. Just certain. The next morning, we drove home together with the windows down and Blake's terrible music playing too loud through the speakers. And somehow everything felt different now. Lighter. Not because we had everything figured out. We absolutely didn't. But because for the first time, we were finally being honest with each other. Halfway through the drive, Blake glanced over and asked carefully, So what happens now? I looked at him for a second before answering. I think, I said slowly, I call Chicago and tell them I'm not coming. Blake nearly swerved off the road. Jordan. I'm serious. His hands tightened on the steering wheel immediately. You need to think about this. I have. For longer than 12 hours preferably. I laughed. Okay, fair. Blake looked genuinely emotional now, though. You don't have to give up opportunities because of me. I'm not giving something up, I said quietly. His eyes flicked toward me. I'm choosing something. The silence after that felt huge. Then Blake reached over blindly until his hand found mine on the center console. And neither of us let go the rest of the drive home. A month later, I was still in town. The Chicago job was gone. I found another one nearby. My apartment was unpacked again. And Blake? Blake practically lived there now. Some nights we still talked about how absurd all of this was. How close we came to missing each other entirely. How he almost let me leave without saying anything. How I almost spent the rest of my life calling him my best friend without realizing he was the love of my life too. One evening we ended up back at the lake where this whole mess really started. Same truck. Same terrible gas station food. Same cracked parking lot. Blake leaned against my shoulder quietly while the radio played softly in the background. You know, he murmured, I really thought I lost you. I turned toward him. You never had to hold on to me that hard, I said softly. His smile faded into something more honest. Yeah, he admitted. But I wanted to. Then he kissed me under the glow of the parking lot lights like he finally believed I wasn't going anywhere. And honestly, neither did I.